Let me begin by expressing my deep sorrow and my condolences to Robert C. Byrd's family. And that family includes, obviously, not only his direct and immediate family, but obviously the literally legions of people who worked for Robert C. Byrd, worked with him in both the House of Representatives and this body for the more than 5 decades that he served in the United States Congress. I suspect I'm one of a handful of people left who remembers the day when I was 7 years old in the gallery of the House of Representatives, watching my father be sworn in as a new congressman, watching my father and a young 34-year-old West Virginian named Robert C. Byrd to be sworn in as a member of the House on January 3rd, 1953. 7 years later, at the age of 14, I was in the galleries of this chamber when I watched my father and his great friend be sworn in together on January 3rd, 1959, as members of the United States Senate. And 2 years later, as a 14-year-old, sitting on the very steps where these young pages sit today, for the summer of 1961, I worked with Robert C. Byrd. In fact, with his departure and his death, he is now the last remaining member of the Senate that was there that day when I first arrived as a page in the summer of 1961, when all these chairs were filled by 100 United States senators. And for the last 25 years, I have sat next to him at this very seat to be the recipient of his good counsel, his advice, his humor, his contributions in so many ways to me as he was to so many others that he served with throughout his tenure in the United States Congress. And so this is a very poignant day, one that begins, in a sense of bookmarks for me and a sense of public life. And it won't be the same for the remaining 6 or 7 months of my tenure here to not have this wonderful, wonderful human being, Robert C. Byrd, as my seatmate in the United States Senate. So I rise today to mark the passing and to celebrate the prolific life of Robert C. Byrd of West Virginia. As I said, to his family, to his staff, and of course to the people of West Virginia, for whom he has been such a champion throughout his public life. Robert Byrd loved 3 things above all else, Mr. President, in the wonderful time, the 30 years that I spent with him in this chamber. He loved his wife, Irma. He loved the state of West Virginia, and he loved deeply the United States Senate. And I might say that each, in turn, loved him back. Our sadness at his passing is tempered by our joy that he now joins his beloved Irma. What a love story it was. They met in grade school. They married in 1937, well before I was even born. They spent nearly 70 years on an incredible journey together. And even after her passing a few years ago, his love for her was apparent in everything he did. In 1946, when Robert Byrd first ran for office, West Virginia ranked near the bottom in nearly every economic indicator you could possibly think of. The bleak landscape pockmarked by coal fields and populated by hard-working people from hard-scrabbled backgrounds and communities, struggling to make ends meet. And then a grocer, a young grocer from the town of Sophia, arrived on the scene, asking his neighbors in those communities around Sophia for their votes in his race for the West Virginia House of Delegates. And as the Washington Post noted in its obituary this morning, Robert C. Byrd met nearly every person, I would suspect every person, in his district, campaigning alone with no one else, talking about the issues he cared about and those that would affect and did affect the people he wanted to represent, and when all else failed, vowing potential voters with his fiddle prowess. He won that election as he would every single election in which he ever ran. The people of West Virginia never could say no to Robert C. Byrd, and he could never say no to them. As a state legislator, a congressman, and as a United States Senator, Robert C. Byrd fought for West Virginians and our nation, I might add, at every single turn. If you traveled the state of West Virginia today, you'll see his name on schools and bridges and highway signs. You'll perceive his influence when you see the government buildings, research laboratories that he brought to West Virginia, investments that contributed both to the state and to our national economy and to our nation. But don't just look for his name on the sides of buildings or overpasses. Listen for it in the appreciative words of his constituents, his extended family, and of a grateful nation for his service. No state has ever had such a deep appreciation for the Senate Appropriations Committee because no state has ever had such an effective appropriator and fighter. Robert C. Byrd came to Congress with my father, as I pointed out, in January of 1953, and they both arrived on the same day as they had in the House on January 3rd of 1959. In the summer of 1961, I mentioned I was a Senate page sitting on the Senate floor. I still remember the eloquent speeches of the freshman senator from West Virginia. It is incredible to imagine that he was once a freshman senator. Even then, he had the same gentlemanly manner, kind to pages, as I recall, the same knack for triumphant oratory, and the same respect for the rules and traditions of the United States Senate. But he soon became a fixture and a mentor to new senators as well. I expect that over the next few days, many senators will take this floor with a Constitution in their pockets, as I can, Mr. President, they received from Robert C. Byrd. And here's my tattered and rather worn copy, signed by Robert C. Byrd. To my friend Chris Dodd, with great personal esteem, sincerely, Robert C. Byrd. And I've carried this with me every day of my life for the last quarter of a century, given to me by my colleague in this chamber. Along, I might add, with a stern but kind lecture about Senate protocol. I might have mine right here, as I said, a tattered and withered copy after this many years. For the past quarter of a century, I've occupied some prime real estate on the floor of the United States Senate. This desk right next to me today, adorned with these flowers and this black cape, marks the seat that Robert C. Byrd sat in for many, many years. And like all of us, I've been awed by his deep knowledge of this institution and his deeper commitment to preserving its place in our legislative system. So in many ways, Robert Byrd's story is one of constancy, of preservation, and of tradition. You could define his life by longevity, I suppose. His 69 years of marriage, his 52 years of service in the United States Senate, his 64 years of public service to the people of West Virginia. But he wouldn't have wanted it that way. This country has changed over the many years in which Robert C. Byrd helped to lead it and to shape it. And he grew and changed with it, I might add. His story in so many ways parallels the American story over these many years, the story of a nation on a long and difficult journey, ever trying to seek that more perfect union that our founders described more than 2 centuries ago. He wouldn't have wanted us to forget about the positions and affiliations that marked the early part of his life and career, and he did not as well. We should learn from our mistakes, he would say, as he did, draw inspiration from his journey, and credit him, I might add, for being willing to admit wrong and embrace right when he had the opportunity to do so. Because like our country, Robert C. Byrd grew wiser as he grew older. And so we can remember him not only as a tremendously effective legislator, not only as a powerful speaker, not only as a parliamentary wizard, but also as a human being who fought for equality with a true sense of urgency of a convert. He was a man unafraid of reflection, a man who voted to make Martin Luther King's birthday a federal holiday because, as he put it, I remember him saying it so well, I'm the only one who must vote for this bill. Here was a man unafraid of progress, a man who in one of his final acts as a United States Senator voted to overturn the don't ask, don't tell rule in our military. Here was a man unafraid of conscience, a man who, as the guns of war prepared to fire in 2003, delivered one of history's most courageous and memorable pleas for peace. So let us not remember Robert C. Byrd for how long he stayed the same throughout his life. Let us remember him for how the years changed him and how he changed America for the better for so many years of his service. Let us remember him as West Virginia's greatest champion, the Senate's gentlemanly scholar, and Irma's husband, and above all, a true friend to each and every one of us who knew and loved him so well. Mr. President, I yield the floor.